Welcome to the Community Legal Forum, a public service program of the Lawyer Referral and Information Service of the San Fernando Valley Bar Association. Today's topic for discussion is domestic violence. Dave's guests today are attorneys Barbara Jean Penny and Thomas Trent Lewis. I am Leon Bennett, and now here's the host of Community Legal Forum, David Hagen.
Thank you, Leon. Welcome to Legal Forum. Let's meet today's guests. First, we have with us today Thomas Trent Lewis. Tom is a practicing family law attorney for 24 years. He is a principal at the firm of Raywald, Ramison, Lewis, and Glazner, located in Woodland Hills. He's a board-certified family law specialist by the State Bar of California and has served as the past chairman of the Board of Legal Specialization. He is a fellow of the American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers and is a past president of the San Fernando Valley Bar Association. Welcome.
Thank you, David.
Barbara Jean Penny. Barbara's been a practicing lawyer for 22 years. Her practice deals almost exclusively with family law issues. Barbara has done a good deal of volunteer work at Hagen Hills, a shelter for battered women, and was instrumental in creating the Family Law Center and the domestic violence clinics, which are now run in the courts by the San Fernando Valley Neighborhood Legal Services Corporation. Barbara is also a past president of the San Fernando Valley Bar Association. Welcome, Barbara.
Thank you, David.
So today we have two past presidents of the Bar Association as our guests, who collectively have over 46 years practicing law, primarily family law. So it's good to have both of you with us.
Good to be here.
Well, let's jump right into it. Barbara, what is domestic violence?
Well, actually, I would describe it as physical or mental abuse of a family member that it's used to control or to maintain power over the other person.
Interesting. Not necessarily physical only, but physical or mental as well.
Abuse of any sort.
Great. All right, Tom, how prevalent is this domestic violence? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, domestic violence is probably one of the largest problems in our society today. It's evidenced by the court dockets in our courts, which are filled with domestic violence cases. Our 911 calls, where at least 1/3 of the 911 calls are as a result of domestic violence calls that are bringing the police out. So unfortunately, domestic violence is extremely prevalent in our society. Extremely prevalent.
Now, do we see domestic violence issues only in dissolutions?
No, we don't. And fortunately, there's laws to help people who can get restraining orders as well as help from the police in situations where there isn't a divorce that's already on file. And that is through our domestic violence laws that help to protect people from being the victim and get orders to protect them.
So the issue doesn't necessarily only come up in a divorce context?
And it's often an advent to a divorce, but it's not only in the divorce setting.
Interesting.
It's in non-marital relationships.
As well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Who are the perpetrators? Either of you, who are the perpetrators in domestic violence?
It's usually the man.
Right.
Sometimes it can be the woman, but it's usually the man, and usually it is aimed, as I said earlier, at controlling the female. A lot of it is because of jealousy. It could be because the person is insecure. It could be because they saw it in their family as they were growing up. There could be no reason. It just could be anger that they can't manage, and they need anger management courses.
Now, it seems like this is a topic that we hear a lot more recently over the last several years, certainly in the media. Is this something that is getting worse, or has domestic violence always been around?
Well, the truth of the matter is that it's always been around as long as I've been practicing law, which is not that long, but it's certainly been part of the practice of law. What is changed over the 24 years that I've been doing it is our sensitivity to it. And the protection that's available to assist victims of domestic violence and the accountability that is imposed upon the perpetrators of it. So in that regard, there's been a major change and shift, especially with respect to both the public, police, and legal resources that are available to help the victim and make sure that they're protected.
Do you see this in the same degree in your cases now as 20 years ago?
Actually, it's in the same degree, but what I noticed most is about 20 years ago when I started going and counseling the women at Hagen Hills, there was nothing available to them. And I can recall going to one of our commissioners and asking them, what do we do for these people? I mean, they cannot get any help. They go back, they're abused again, they're afraid to leave, they have no help out there for them, and you really want to tell them, go ahead and leave. And one of the things he did tell me, he said, no, you tell them that they need to stay here, because if they leave, then they're going to lose maybe custody or whatever else. Now, finally, as a result of what, like Betty Fisher at Hagen Hills and a lot of those people have done, it's now at the forefront, and people are now paying attention to it. The police departments now have to react a lot differently than they used to. There's just so much more help out there for people. Well, the domestic violence clinics alone speak to exactly what's happened now, and those are just fairly new. So at least it's now in the forefront, but it's always been there, and I'm not seeing any more now than before, just more help for it.
Now, I've heard some family law attorneys describe themselves or their practice as primarily representing the husband and the wife, or the wife. Would you describe either of your practices that way, or is that even an accurate characterization anymore?
I don't think it's an accurate characterization for most people who specialize in family law. We're here to help people and not discriminate based on gender whatsoever. And so for me, I can't say that 50% of my practice is one way or the other. It's the people who need help, and that comes in both genders. So I wouldn't say for me that there's any differentiation.
I agree with Tom. In my practice, it's 50-50, but I do know that there are those men's rights groups out there now that are getting very active and stirring the pot as it relates to a lot of the issues. And we're going to be seeing more and more of that, I'm sure. And I know that they just represent men, and it's usually men who have maybe been in violent situations where they've been the perpetrator of the violence.
Well, we're talking here about men primarily being the perpetrator. Ever represented a battered husband?
Actually, I haven't represented a battered husband, but I just recently represented a husband who did not batter his wife, and she actually dropped the charges because you could tell by the fact pattern that was given to the police and what had transpired that it couldn't have happened as she said. So he didn't, in this particular instance, he wasn't battered, but she wasn't telling the truth.
Tom?
Well, I have, yes, I have. In fact, as recently as a few days ago, I was consulted by a man who was the victim of domestic violence. I agree with Barbara's earlier comment that it usually is the woman who is the victim. I think the children are the biggest victims, especially when they witness it.
Important point, yes.
I think we'll be talking about that more in a while. But I have seen men who've been the victims of domestic violence. Women get angry too. I think men, unfortunately, are the ones that usually do express their anger through the violent acts. So I don't want to make it sound like that, oh, it's a 50-50 thing, because it's clearly not. It's usually the women that are the victims.
But there are women aggressors.
I've
Definitely.
Seen it.
Interesting, interesting.
And most of the men won't speak out.
Now, do you ever see situations where you've got grandparents involved in terms of a domestic violence situation?
Often,
does it go cross-generational?
Well, I think you learn from what you see in your own home, and so certainly I'm sure there's lots of data that would suggest that that's so. Anything I would have to say would be based on my own experience, and I've seen situations where people who are battered marry someone who is a batterer, and that goes across the generation on both sides. But I couldn't speak to anything with real authority on the statistics for it, but I've seen it happen.
There's no requirement that it necessarily be husband and wife or even cohabitation partners.
No, but usually when you see the grandparents, they're coming in as a witness for their son, who is the perpetrator of the violence. Not necessarily the violent person, but they're not doing the violence, but they're coming in and assisting this other person, stating he couldn't possibly have done it. He's just not like that.
Well, let's get just a little bit more specific.
Sure.
Today we've got a letter from a viewer, and Leon, why don't you read that letter for us?
Thanks, Dave. We have a letter from a lady by the name of Tracy. Tracy writes, "Dear Mr. Hagen, I'm a 31-year-old mother of 2 small children. I have recently separated from my husband because I can no longer take his constant abuse. He yells at me all of the time and has pushed me around on a few occasions, but has never really physically hurt me. Since we have separated, he has called me at all hours of the day and night, threatening me that if I try to move back to Indiana to live with my mother and father, he will fight me for custody of our children. He has told me that he will bring up my affair with his brother and the fact that I left a scar on his face when I scratched him trying to keep him away from me one night when he was drunk and pushing me around. On that evening, he threw a bottle of beer at me, but luckily it missed and hit the wall behind me. The glass shattered and beer sprayed on me and our 6-month-old baby, who I was holding in my arms. I'm afraid he will carry out his threats, and I don't know what to do. Help.
Sounds like a pretty desperate set of facts. Barbara, what would you do to help?
Well, first of all, from this letter, I can't tell when the last incident of physical violence was. However, I would immediately go in on restraining orders because of the harassing phone calls. So that would be my first toe into the door of the courthouse, so to speak, to get there on an ex-parte basis so that I could get some orders to assist this person. And since I'm going in for the harassment phone calls and restraining orders in that regard, I would also ask for restraining orders with regard to the battering, etc. You're there anyway, and the courts, since they're not together anymore, they're living separate and apart, the courts will probably issue the restraining orders as it relates to the harassing and the battering, etc. But also you want to get in there and you want to get your custody orders so there isn't a tug of war with these children, because as of this particular point in time, either one of them can have custody of these children. So if father wants to come and take them to his house, and then mother wants to come and take her back to her house, and the children can turn into little yo-yos like that. And then we have the support orders that you want to get in, and you want to get those. So those would probably be the major ones that I would be looking at when I'm first going into court.
Well, now, what is this restraining order? Where does it come from, and what does it say, and what do you do with it?
Well, what you initially have to realize is that you can go to the domestic violence clinics and they will, for free, help you fill out a paper that is your application for an order. And you will put in there all of the incidences that have occurred with regard to the phone calls and with regard to the physical abuse. As I say in the hypothetical that we've just talked about, or this letter I should say that we just heard about, that we don't know when the most recent incident of physical abuse is, and the courts will not give you restraining orders as it relates to physical abuse unless you have something that's quite recent or you have separated immediately after the last incident. So one of the things that when you get these orders, you'll go in and you do what's called an ex parte notice, where you go in with just 24 hours notice or 4 hours or whatever it may be for that court system, and get these immediate orders to protect this person.
And what do you do with this order? Do you post it on the door? Do you give it to the police department? What's done with that order?
Well, you have to serve it on the other party, and you have to serve it on the police department. So those are the two places that you want to serve it. And it's not really effective until you serve it on the party. At least as far as them being in contempt for violating any court order, it's not in effect. So that's basically, you would want to serve the party, hopefully that day in court. Hopefully they'll come to court, they'll see that the order is issued, they'll get a copy of the order, and then you take it to the police department and they get a copy and put it into their computers so that they can pull it up.
And if the police show up, or not the police, but if this individual shows up and is violating this restraining order, then what happens?
They'll take him away on the spot if he has been served with it. If he hasn't been served with it, they will serve him with it and give him a warning. And then if he comes back again, which happens quite often, that very same night, then the next time they will take him in.
So there's some teeth behind this restraining order?
Yes, there is, but one of the things I think you have to understand that there are some people, I think you should almost classify batterers, because there are some that a restraining order doesn't mean anything to them. So those are the women that'll go into the shelters, and those are the women that don't want to stay at the family residence where this man can find them. And so that's, sometimes what I tell a lot of people is it's just a piece of paper, and you know how long it takes the police to get to your house. a lot can happen before they get there. So you have to really know the person you're dealing with. And will they honor this piece of paper, or are they the type of person that doesn't mean anything to them? And those are the ones that are going to want to find a safe haven for themselves.
Wow. Well, Tom, if you were representing the husband,
he's
taking the other
victim.
side.
I see him as the victim under these facts.
Okay, tell us about that.
Well, let's look at the letter. Tracy admits that she left a scar on her husband's face when she scratched him. She writes the letter and admits that she has actually taken some aggressive moves physically. She also describes that he has, quote, never really physically hurt me. So what I see is a deeply dysfunctional family where there's alcohol problems, where there's yelling and screaming as problems, where there's lunging at one another as problems, where it's clear that the children have been exposed to this. I see many of these comments on Tracy's part as her effort to try to advance her custody dispute, because doubtless she's either become aware because of what's available out there in terms of resources in the law, and learned if I can show that there's been domestic violence, there's a presumption that I should have custody of the children. Federal law now permits that I can cross state lines without any notice. And so I think Tracy, frankly, is probably, on these facts alone, as much of a perpetrator of domestic violence as the husband is. I certainly will say this. It's clear that he has done things that are much more demonstrative. And I think that if this came before me, sitting as pro tem one day on a Thursday morning, where husband came in with declarations saying, and she did X, Y, and Z to me, then probably what you would see happen is orders issued against both of them having any contact with the other, and then setting a shortened time hearing, meaning a very quick hearing time, to make some determination about how it is that these apparently not well parents should share time with these obviously injured children who've been in the face of horrible conduct on both of their parts, frankly.
I disagree totally with what Tom has to say. I don't see anything in this letter that shows that she's an aggressor at all. She was trying to protect herself. And also he has this misconception that when a person says that they were not really hurt, he pushed me around, they have no idea of the fear that this person feels when some big guy is pushing them around. You have to take into consideration the difference in strength and the difference in size, the difference in power that these two people have. Even the fact that he earns the money gives him power, if that's what the family situation is. So I just see her actually as trying to protect herself and her child when she scratched him. So I don't see it at all the way that Tom has put it.
The problem with that is very simply this. This is a young lady who has apparently made some very interesting choices in who it is that she's going to become involved with. When she gets confronted by that fact, her response is a violent response. Now, of course, she's telling us her side of the story. What Barbara and I don't know is several things that are important. Number one, we don't know from this letter that the husband is the breadwinner in the family, because that's not always the situation. We don't know who's bigger or smaller. We know that we have what appears to be a situation that fits within the classic mold of the abusive husband. And I give Barbara credit that this does look like the typical pattern. But our job as lawyers, and the court's job, is to sort through all of this and do the first and foremost thing. And what is that? Protect these children from what are obviously parents with problems. Their choices, the choices that they've made along the way, the decisions that they've made have impacted on these children. It's clear to me they shouldn't be under the same roof. It's clear to me that there should be restraining orders in place. If, in fact, he has been injured by her, I think most courts would probably issue mutual joint orders restraining both of them from contacting or harassing the other. And then, as I said before, bringing the kids before the court so that some type of an order can be put in place to determine how to best protect them from their parents.
Isn't there an undercurrent of some perhaps gamesmanship going on here as well? in terms of leading up to custody and control of the family house, or do you think that's completely irrelevant in this set of facts?
Well, actually, on this set of facts, I wouldn't presume that there's any gamesmanship going on, but yes, there is a lot of gamesmanship that goes on as it relates to restraining orders, because it's becoming common knowledge that if you get a restraining order against the other spouse, that you really have a leg up when it comes to the custody problems. And I can tell you one thing, I would never advise her that she can move back to Indiana with these children. You know, she's jumping to that. Now that does make me, you know, in Tom's defense there too, that does make me a little suspicious that something could be going on here that we don't know about.
Okay. Okay. Well, what about, by the way, both of you have served as judge pro tem, is
Yes.
that correct? Judge pro tem is like a temporary judge sitting in for a judge for the day?
On assignment as volunteers.
And that really gives you yet an additional perspective in terms of how these issues come through the courts.
Well, I think what really gives you the real perspective is not just that, but it's that for me, I've represented both the perpetrator of domestic violence as well as the victim of it. And my rule is very simple. If you've been accused of domestic violence, you're going to get some help. I'm going to see to it, or else you're going to find a new lawyer. That's my simple rule. I'm not going to tolerate people who continue to make these kinds of choices. And if you're the victim and you're not going to take some proactive steps to make sure you get some help, to learn why it is you've allowed yourself to be sucked in to the cycle of domestic violence, which often happens, and we see it happen all the time. I'm sure Barbara can speak to that with more authority than I.
Actually, you bring up a real good point there, but one of the things that I find a lot of in victims of domestic violence is that they're very depressed, and they don't even realize it. They don't realize how severe their depression is. So I always refer them, when I pick up on the fact that there's something, when they start saying, well, I can't even care for the kids, all I do is stay in bed and cry, I don't even want to eat, and they start telling you things that really make you worry about their mental health at that particular point in time, I always refer them for some counseling so that they can take care of themselves a little bit better. It's scary.
That's not even the worst of it, though, if I could just tag off of what Barbara just said. What's really worse is when you see the victim start to explain away the conduct of the perpetrator, or when you see the perpetrator minimizing their personal responsibility for the conduct that they've engaged in. And that's the really bad part of the cycle of domestic violence, because those are people who can't even see that they're victims or perpetrators.
And these are issues even larger than the legal issues involved. These are human issues. These are people issues. Fascinating, fascinating.
But you have to take it to that degree. You really do have to help the people through the system.
Yeah. Where can people go for help?
Well, the first place to go is if there is an act of domestic violence happening in your home, then dial 911. Because if you think that you're going to just fend it off or it's going to get better, then you need to call the police. I have to say that you need to be prepared that once you involve law enforcement today, as I said earlier, at least 1/3 of our 911 calls do involve domestic violence. The protocols that law enforcement have put in place today are serious, and someone is probably going to get arrested and go to jail. And then when it goes into the hands of the district attorney's office, then it's not going to just be that Tracy says, oh, I'm sorry, and I didn't mean it, and I want it to all go away. Now you've involved law enforcement, things are going to get serious. And then beyond that, there are a lot of other great resources that are available that I know.
What are some of those other sources, quickly, Barbara?
Well, actually, if you're really in fear of what's going to happen to you, I would call the Hagen Hills Crisis Line. Hagen Hills is a battered women's center. Phone number is 818-887-6589, 818-887-6589. And then we have the domestic violence clinics, and they're through the San Fernando Valley Neighborhood Legal Services. It's 818-896-5211. Again, that's 896-5211.
And what about if you need to hire a lawyer to get some representation?
Sure. Well, certainly each community operates, and our San Fernando Valley does as well, a lawyer referral and information service. And that's a great way to get somebody who's competent, who's been pre-screened, and who can provide you with the kind of help that you need. And there are many resources available as well, both online as well as available at the courthouses. So we've got the resources for the victims, and we have resources that are available for perpetrators too. As Barbara said earlier, there are lots of classes now to assist the people that need help, to learn to break the cycle of anger and find a healthy way to express anger and find a healthy way to resolve conflict without resorting to arms or throwing things.
So the bottom line perhaps would be don't tolerate the abuse and get some help on both sides of the equation.
Absolutely.
That's correct.
On both sides of the equation. Well, that's all the time that we have here today. I appreciate both of you coming in and spending some time talking with us about this very interesting issue. Certainly an honor to have two past presidents of the San Fernando Valley Bar Association with us today, and two practitioners who are not only very experienced but committed to helping people and resolving some of these issues.
Great.
So thank you very much
Thank
for
you,
coming
David.
in.
Thank you, David.
Well,
Good seeing you, Barbara.
Nice to see you.
that's all we have time for today. Till next time, this is your host, David Hagen. Till then.
This has been the Community Legal Forum, brought to you by the Lawyer Referral and Information Service of the San Fernando Valley Bar Association. The Lawyer Referral and Information Service and the San Fernando Valley Bar Association has been serving the Valley and adjacent communities for over 75 years. For further information, contact the San Fernando Valley Bar Association.